Hello, everybody. This is Lucas Smith. I am the one of two sons of Patrick Smith, actually his favorite son. And I wanted to give you an update on his current medical status. As you know, he went into the hospital in Sault Ste. Marie on October 31st with COVID symptoms and was diagnosed with COVID. And he had kind of a rocky stay there at the hospital. And then on the Friday after Thanksgiving, we received a phone call from the doctor that was taking care of him that 90% of his lungs were not working correctly. And it was not a good situation. In fact, we were looking at plans for end of life. And the doctor told me that the two options we had were to leave him on 100% forced oxygen, and he could live a couple weeks maybe. He would develop pneumonia probably and pass away that way, or they would put him in comfort care and he would have the choice to take his oxygen out, and then it would be a matter of hours. So we had the conversation as a family, and we talked about things and worked through the weekend and all the details that came up with that. It was that Sunday evening that I was planning his funeral. We had accepted the fact that this was going to be the end, so we made the plans accordingly. However, Dr. Rashad Farha came in on his round that Monday and met my father, and I brought Rashad in on this Zoom call today to talk about a few things. But the reason we're here is because we're celebrating, we're praising God for a miracle. We were planning Dad's funeral, and today, currently, right this second, he is en route to a rehab facility to finish out his rehab to make a full recovery. So within 3 weeks, we went from planning the worst to celebrating the best. And a lot has to do with the people involved at the hospital up there, but specifically Dr. Farha. And I just wanted to give him the floor a little bit. I was going to ask him a few questions and let him introduce himself, but he's a hospitalist with the Henry Ford Hospital's health system down in Detroit area, and he does rounds up in Sault Ste. Marie at War Memorial Hospital also. So without further ado, Doctor, tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe how you got into medicine, what brought you and how you crossed paths and why you were in Sault Ste. Marie. But yeah, we'll give you the floor here for that.
Thank you, Lucas. So I guess if you're his favorite son, I'm his favorite doctor, right?
Yep.
So I'm Rashad Farha. I'm board certified in internal medicine. I went to medical school at Toledo. I kind of been around Southeast Michigan my whole life. Medical school in Toledo, residency training at Henry Ford, which I finished in 2017. I actually initially was going to sign on as a full-time physician at Henry Ford. I did some what we call locum work, where we fill in for other doctors, and a recruitment company took me to the UP, and I worked a 10-day stretch in August, and it was beautiful, like the UP always is in August. And they convinced me to sign a full contract for 3 years, and actually, which just ended a couple months ago when I re-signed for another 3. So that's kind of how I got to the UP.
And can you expand on a little bit of the terminal condition my father was in when you met him, when you came up to do your work there for that week, and kind of what was your mindset and your strategy knowing his condition, and maybe talk a little bit about the medical dealings that went on?
Yeah, sure. So as we all know, COVID-19, essentially a viral infection that is novel, new, and it's kind of plagued us for the past several months. He was diagnosed, I believe, sometime before he was admitted to the hospital. And like a lot of people, after the initial infection, some people, get better and, they beat the infection, and some people go on to a much longer struggle with the disease, which is mainly an inflammatory cascade that affects the lungs. So when I came on to service, I think he had been there for over 30 days, or maybe it was 30 exactly when I came on. And he was on the maximum therapy oxygen that we can give him before putting him on life support, a mechanical ventilator. So that included what is called high flow oxygen. And the reason they call it that is because it has a pressure system, and he was receiving the maximal pressure, which was 40 liters of flow at 100% of oxygen. And on top of that, he had what's called a non-rebreather, which is a mask that goes above this machine. So this was basically the maximum oxygen therapy he could have received. And even on this maximal oxygen requirements, if he moved his arm to grab his phone or even try to get something to eat, his oxygen saturations would drop in the 70s. So he was quite ill. His lungs were severely damaged, which is what we see in a lot of COVID-19 patients. So essentially it's called COVID-19 pneumonia. Pneumonia is any disease of any infection of the lung. So you can have a bacterial pneumonia, or COVID-19 can give you pneumonia, as well as influenza, like the regular flu can give you pneumonia. And that's what he had. And, you know, when I talked to him that day, you know, I walked in the room and he seemed like he, you know, has been through a lot. I mean, obviously, and he had been. And the one thing I kind of wanted to do at the very beginning when I met him was try to give him a little positivity, give him a little light, see the silver lining, you know. And I know that's a very difficult thing to do. And, you know, maybe it even seemed overzealous at the time, but it just was important to me because I know that how important positivity is in healing. And the same way depression and stress can lead to disease, positivity can lead to healing. So that was very important to me.
So can we expand quickly on the regimen that you had thought about and wanted to, I don't think the word is experiment, but give it a go, that was not, especially early on in COVID, was not a popular thing to do. Expand on what you did with the steroids,
Sure.
with the medicine.
Sure. Yeah. So back in March, when COVID first came about, like all diseases, we don't know much about them. And to be honest, I think today we still don't know much about COVID. I think that the more you know, the more you don't know. And I think that if anybody tells you they do know, they just don't know, you know. But so in March, the recommendation was against steroids. It essentially said that the steroids worsen the condition. And I just have a kind of a theory of why this might be. Basically, when you get COVID or any type of viral infection, you have your immune system that has to react. And there's two types of immune system. There's your innate immunity, which is kind of like your frontline defense. You know, think about it as like the guards, you know. And then you have your adaptive immunity, which is kind of like your cyber intelligence and stuff, which kind of remembers diseases for what they are. The innate immunity has to have its ability to react. And maybe the steroids early on were not allowing that. But ultimately, what we were seeing is that people would do, you know, they would have kind of the same path in the first several days of getting the infection. And a lot of people seem like they would get better or get a lot worse. And that a lot worse lasted a lot longer for certain people. And we know that as you age, your adaptive immunity, which is the smarter of the two immune systems, it doesn't work as cohesively or properly as it should. And sometimes it can get out of control. And that's what we've been seeing with COVID. So I think that for him, what ultimately happened was his adaptive immunity went out of control, and it damaged his lungs, and it laid a lot of inflammatory fluids and tissue down. Now, it's important to remember that none of this was scar tissue. And that's an important difference. Fibrosis and scarring are irreversible conditions. Now, inflammatory fluid and inflammatory tissue, it's not completely, it's not irreversible, it's not permanent. And that's a key thing that I remembered that made me think that we have to keep fighting for him. We cannot think about hospice care. We cannot think about end of life care, because we know physiologically it takes months for lungs to become fibrotic. That means that what was going on in his lungs, although it did encompass 90% of his lungs, he had very little healthy lung tissue when I started, but it still was reversible. And because it's inflammation, I thought steroids should do the trick, because steroids, they decrease your immune response. So what I did was I looked at his regimen. He had received steroids early on, but at a very low dose, which is the standard of care, because now months later after March, the NIH and the WHO, they are recommending steroids as the standard of care. But for him, you know, I thought of giving him a much higher dose of steroids. So we did trial that. I discussed it with him, and I said, ultimately, just to give you guys numbers, he essentially received the equivalent of 40 milligrams of steroids daily when I came onto service. I talked to him about increasing that to what I thought is the maximal dose of 900 milligrams of steroids. I was basically shutting down his immune system. And it's important because we had to rule out a couple of other things to make sure he didn't have an infection elsewhere that could have taken over now that we were shutting his immune system down. And I think it was the positivity that we talked about the first day that I walked in there, and I told him, Pat, you have to be positive. You have to self-heal, and you have to be open to receiving the healing. And in order for this to work. And I think that conversation allowed him to give this a shot, because maybe if we did not have this conversation, he would have said, look, just leave me be, let me be comfortable. I'm done with the struggle. But that positivity, that conversation we had allowed us to try a new medical therapy. And sure enough, it worked wonders. And you know, today he's on 2 liters, down from 40 liters of flow, and he was able to walk in his room, which he wasn't even able to reach for a piece of food without feeling short of breath. So I think that you know, God, it worked, and we did a great thing. And you know, I give him all the credit, because he was able to convince himself to try something new and start a new chapter. And I think that positivity was important.
So in a nutshell, steroids had him, that gave his system the opportunity to fight that inflammation.
I think that that's what happened. I think that ultimately he had a lot of fluid and inflammatory changes occurring in his lung, and we were able to, with the high dose steroids, kind of settle that down. And I think that it's an interesting finding, and I wonder how many more people would benefit from, you know, very high dose steroids. Especially people think about it, you know, you're at a place where your lungs seem like they're not going to return from. And you know, I just think in certain scenarios we should be researching that more and consider giving it a shot, because at that point you really don't have much to lose, you know.
Right. Yeah.
And you know, with him in particular, it was important to me that, you know, I walked in that room, I saw a 66-year-old guy. He told me he was riding his bike, you know, prior to all this, 6 miles a day, and he was very conscious of COVID. He was worried about it, you know, because you know, the media, that's what they do. They do try to make us, you know, afraid. And I don't know if it's right or wrong what they do, but you know, I guess sometimes we forget the impact of stress and negativity and how that can affect our health. And I think that we don't pay much attention to that, and we should. And I think that what he did, he tried to get away. He told me he went to a cabin to write I think he was working on a novel or something, and, to get away from COVID. And then he ultimately got it. And not only did he get it, but he was days away from death, when I met him. And it just an interesting story altogether.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that, and that really kind of dovetails into my next question. You've had opportunities to spend some time with him, and some deeper time than most patients, maybe because of the turnaround that started to happen. But explain the unique relationship you developed with him? Maybe expand on that a little bit. Maybe more than just the normal bedside conversations. But I know Dad was really appreciated that relationship piece of it.
Oh, I am too. It's amazing because I remember at some point, he was worried that I was leaving service, and he was thinking, when you came onto service, everything changed. And I'm not trying to give myself credit or anything, but he felt a positivity and a confidence, and he, started to get better in time. And he was afraid that, I was the sole reason for that. And he was afraid that if I left, because I did an 11-day stretch, and he was worried on day 11 or 12 if things would turn around. And so I gave him my number, and I told him that, look, I'm not going to let that happen, first of all, and you're going to be able to call me at any time. And I just got an iPhone a week ago, which is funny because it literally was a week before I started service. So we were able to FaceTime, and yeah, we developed a relationship. And I remember at some point he said, I don't know I know that you probably aren't allowed to. He was worried that I wasn't going to engage, and it didn't matter to me what anybody said. I felt that it was important for me to be there by his side, and even if I was off the clock. And I think that's important. We built a pretty good relationship, and we talk every day now. So he calls me Dr. Bo Schembechler, because he's a huge U of M fan, and I was born and raised in Ann Arbor, and I'm a huge U of M fan. And so I tell him he's Charles Woodson because he's the most valuable player, and he, it's his confidence and his positivity that got him out of this. I can give 100 people the same medications, but they're not going to all respond the same way. And that's important to consider. That positivity is key.
Well, yeah, I really appreciate it. Obviously, we're eternally grateful for your care and passion for what you do, not only the positivity part of it, but the medicine part of it. You're a part of our family now, Dr. Bo, forever, like it or not. Maybe he'll adopt you as a third son, but I'm still the favorite. But anyway, one last thing I want to leave people with who are watching this or who have interest. What advice would you give to people who are maybe dealing with a relative that has come down with COVID, or dealing with the after effects of COVID, or just any general advice for battling this in the world we're in today?
Yeah. So so I think that with COVID, it's important to remember that it's still a viral infection. I know it can have a lot of effects on the body, and there are times when you do have to call it quits. But I think that when you have an overall healthy person who is battling COVID and their lungs are failing on them, to give it time. I think time is very important. I think never lose hope, always keep the faith, and stay positive, because we've seen people, and I can't remember exact stories, but I know that people have left other hospitals without any oxygen at all after being on life support for months. And I think that it's easy to say, I think this is the end, let's start, morphine, or let's make you comfortable. It's hard to fight. And I encourage those people to fight and, do the hard thing. It'd be worth it in the end. So.
Well, I appreciate that. We love you. Again, thanks, Dr. Farha, for everything you've done and taking the time today to talk. I know it means the world to my dad, and hopefully somebody can get something from this video. So, yeah, good luck in your future, and we appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks.